in today's video for PokerNews.com, we have a hand featuring the king of video blogging. Can you tell by his thumb there? Well, if you can't, it is Brad Owen. He is playing 5-10 no limit hold'em. In this hand, Brad Owen makes a set, and that's to figure out how to get full value. Let's get right to it.
It's time to get down to business. The first orbit I pick up pocket nines in the big blind. Rocco raises to 30 from the small blind. I could call or 3-bet. I call for 20 more. We're heads up in position. The flop.
All right. Brad says facing a small blind raise, he can call or 3-bet, and I think you really just want to 3-bet basically every time. From the big blind against the small blind or late position raiser, you're going to pretty much always want to re-raise with your best hands, and then either a lot of hands that flop well when you're going to be out of position, or some like junky blocker hands whenever you're going to be in position. So you have to ask, what happens if I don't 3-bet hands like nines? Well, that makes your 3-betting range usually very, very premium, right? Or perhaps if you're bluffing adequately, it makes your 3-betting range actually a little bluff heavy, right? But you're going to find that you usually want to 3-bet your best hands, and nines is certainly one of your best hands. The only time I would not 3-bet here is if I think the player in the small blind is like really, really tight when it comes to raising, as some people will be. Some people will literally only raise really good hands from the small blind and they'll limp or fold everything else. In that case, maybe we can call. Sounds like Brad mixes it up here, which is certainly fine. And in live poker, you definitely want to adjust based on whatever your opponents do incorrectly. All right, here we go. Let's see the flop.
Flop comes Jack 9-3 with 2 hearts. Right away, we've got middle set. Small blind bets 20. There are a lot of draws out there, but I'm in position, and even if he hits one, I can still potentially make a boat to win a huge hand. I call in order to keep the opponent's bluffs in.
So, facing a tiny bet, I think you want to raise. If Rocco bet bigger, I think I'd be a little bit more inclined to call. But whenever he bets tiny, 20 into 60, I think you want to go ahead and put in the raise. Brad said he wants to keep the bluffs in or draws in. The problem, though, is if you think about a lot of the bluffs/draws, a lot of those actually improve to the best hand whenever they get there, right? Like if your opponent does have a hand like King 10, you don't really care if King 10 folds if it will not keep barreling on random turns. Now, I don't know anything about his opponent, Rocco. Maybe Rocco's insane. Maybe he's a nit. I don't know. But in general, facing small bets, you usually want to raise with your best hands. So I think I'd go ahead and put in a raise in this scenario just to build the pot because they are playing pretty deep stacked. But Brad calls, fine. If he does call in this scenario, I would presume that that means he thinks his opponent's going to be a little bit bluff heavy, which is probably fine.
Most of the time, he'll have very few outs. The turn is the king of spades. Queen 10 gets there. The small blind increases its bet size to 140.
Oh my God. All right, pot's $100. And now, the opponent bets 140. This is something you do not see all that often in live cash games. Although, as you play higher and higher stakes, you will inevitably start to see this because it actually is good poker when you have a lot of pretty strong but vulnerable hands in your range, as the small blind should in this scenario. So, facing an overbet, especially in position, you usually just don't want to raise with any part of your range because your opponent should have a decent amount of nuts in their range. So what are nuts here? Well, Queen 10 is very clearly the nuts, and I think the small blind could definitely have it, right? That said, I don't mind raising, especially if you think your opponent's going to be unable to fold a hand like a king, as a lot of players will not be able to. So this is a weird scenario where I'm sure from a game theory optimal point of view, you're just not supposed to do a lot of raising. But playing live poker, if I think my opponent likes their hand, they're probably not going to be able to do a lot of folding. And if we do happen to be against a straight, such as live.
You can't always be afraid that people have the nuts against you. I raised to 400 before this board gets any worse for my hand.
So he does go to 400, which I think is fine. I might go a little bit bigger depending on how deep we are. As we're deeper and deeper, I would go bigger and bigger. But I think the size is fine because anyone with a king is just not going to fold. If you do start going really big, like 600, maybe a hand like King 10 makes a fold, which would be clearly very, very bad for Brad. He does go 400, gets the call.
Even if I'm up against top pair or 2-pair, there are a lot of bad river cards that could make it tougher for me to get paid later on. I want to make sure I pump up the pot now. The small blind doesn't believe me yet. He calls. I like it. Things are heating up. The river is the 4 of hearts. That's not great because the flush draw gets there. The small blind checks. Sets are rare, so I'm going to go for max value despite there being a lot of other combinations of hands that beat me at this point.
So the 4 is definitely terrible, the 4 of hearts, because now we lose to the flush. And when the small blind bets turn and then calls a raise, I think he's going to have a whole lot of hands containing a king and a whole lot of flushes. So you may say, well, I should just check it back then because a king's going to fold to a river bet. I'm not so sure, especially if the king is a decent one, like king queen, king 10, or king jack, all of which I think are very possible. He may even have ace king, right? So for that reason, I definitely think we do need to value bet. The question is, how much will those hands that we're trying to get called by call? And I think the right number in this scenario is usually something like half pot. And from a GTO point of view, again, we're not necessarily trying to play GTO when we're playing 5-10 at the Aria, but from a GTO point of view, you usually want to be betting big, like pot or bigger, with your hands that are almost always good, like flushes. Then you want to be going for a smaller value bet size with some super nuts, like flushes, but also with some thinner value hands, like straights and sets, and maybe top 2 pair, maybe even king 9 type hands. So I think this probably wants to fit into a medium bet size, like half pot. Let's see what Brad decides to do.
I bet 700. It's on the larger side. I'm hoping that I'm up against something like king jack. I'm actually not 100% sure that I'm best at the moment. Hearing Rocco's conversation with himself makes me feel much more confident, though.
I mean, so many things got there.
You can also hear in the background another player's future plans.
I'm purposely going to play a double hand.
It's an interesting remark that I actually didn't even hear in real time, but it illustrates that people have different motivations when they play against me that I have to navigate through. In general, opponents try to bluff me more, and they call lighter, so my adjustment to that is to typically bluff less, go for value lighter, and for larger amounts, I also call lighter.
Let's talk about that real quick, because Jonathan Little deals with that a little bit too. If you think that your opponents just kind of want to play pots with you, and if you think that they think you bluff a little bit too much or you battle a little bit too hard, what is the adjustment? Well, the adjustment is to go for thinner value using a big size, exactly like Brad is doing here. And depending on how you play at the live poker table, your opponents may think you're a weak type player, in which case they're going to fold a lot, which means you should be bluffing a lot more. Maybe they're going to call a ton because they think you're very bluff happy. But whatever your image is, you definitely want to adjust to take advantage of it, assuming your opponents care about that type of thing. Some people do, some people do not. Brad is the king of video blogging, and people at his table are announcing, I'm going to play a dumb pot with Brad. Why? Because I want to get in the blog. The blog, vlog. I'm an old person. They used to have blogs whenever I was young. Anyway, this is a spot where if Brad's read is accurate, and his opponents are literally announcing it's accurate for at least some of them, then I definitely like this idea of going for just a little bit bigger amounts of value, because you're just going to win more money when you have hands like this. And if you do get raised, it's just a fold. The thing is that if your opponents are going to bluff you an insane amount by check raising all in on the river, well then you got to be a little bit cautious going for these value bets. That said, typically I think whenever the players are running bluffs, it's usually when they have been the aggressor throughout the hand. Most people don't go for all that many check raise all in bluffs on the river. So I like this play a lot from Brad, assuming he has that image, which he definitely does.
Back to this particular hand. Rocco is tanking harder than Bitcoin after an Elon Musk tweet. Eventually, he briefly flashes king-queen offsuit while he's in the middle of his decision. A call would be great here. He's still tanking. Best case scenario is that enough time passes that he somehow forgets he showed me his hand, then tries to turn it into a bluff shove. I suppose that's a bit optimistic. Eventually, Rocco makes the correct laydown.
Good fold, good fold. Yeah, good fold.
Good fold, good fold. He has the king-queen, which was exactly the hand we're trying to get value from. Rough. This is a spot where I'm not exactly sure of the advice to give to Brad, because his read that people call big value bets against him more often than they should could very easily be correct. But it's very important to pinpoint your particular opponent's motivation. I know if you're going to put me on a video blog, I'm just going to try to play as well as I possibly can, because I don't want to get embarrassed on your video blog, right? Whereas other players are going to be nuts against you. So you have to be very careful when you do have any sort of known image, maybe because you play at your local casino all the time, or maybe you're a poker video blogger. You want to be very careful that you do not assume that everyone has the same view about you. And I don't know what Rocco thinks. Maybe Brad's play was perfectly fine. It just didn't work out this time. But whenever you see your opponents folding out the exact hand you're trying to get called by for an exploitatively, perhaps large amount, that's not ideal, right? So in this scenario against Rocco in the future, I would just try to play a little bit closer to GTO. And I think in this spot, a GTO bet size on the river is going to be more like half pot instead of 3/4 or closer to full pot. So cool hand. And, well, Brad won some, but did not get full value. Tough luck. If you enjoyed this hand, do me a favor, click the like and subscribe button below. That lets me know that you like hands featuring Brad Owen. I like Brad Owen. He is a good king of video blogs. If you have any other fun hands that you want to see me cover that video bloggers have played, let me know in the comments section below. Go get the link, ideally a timestamp, put it right there. We will take a look at it, and if that video blogger wants to work with me, I will work with them. It's very important to be friendly. Work together, collaborate, and add value. That way we all build and grow together. Good luck in your games. Have a great, great week, and I hope all your value bets get called.